Thank you all so much for joining me. I think one of the things is we look out the audience, and I've been sort of working the room and saying hi to folks. We just have just every cross section that you can imagine when you begin thinking about retirement, what's going on. If you think through the roster of questions really that Margaret Lowe just put on the table, it's a very diverse plate. But I want to start with Jessica and the trip that you went on to explore really the question of those that had retired, I learned last night, maybe pre-tired, and how they are dealing with this. You've written an amazing new book called Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century. Just take us on a journey there for a moment as we open this conversation.
Absolutely. So Nomadland tells the stories of a growing group of Americans for whom what we consider that traditional retirement promise did not materialize. People who are at the bottom of the income bracket, people who either lived paycheck to paycheck for much of their lives, largely a consequence of depressed wages, and couldn't save, or got wrecked by the 2008 recession. And on account of flat wages and rising housing costs, found that they had to give up traditional, what nomads would call stick and brick housing, and take to the road. Take to the road in late model RVs and vans and travel trailers and sometimes a few sedans, working jobs all over the country seasonally to make ends meet. These are people who are trying to determine another way, who basically realize that if they stayed in traditional housing, those costs would eat up everything they have, and they would work until they dropped dead, which is
I think we have a couple of photos from the book. I don't know if we have them ready to go. They should have been.
Oh, I think I was to cue the first one.
Well, we're going to forget the photos. There we go. So tell us about these real quickly.
Yeah, so just a few of the faces I met on the road. This is Samir and Mr. Pico, his chihuahua. When we talk about people getting pushed out of traditional housing for all sorts of reasons, Samir's retirement dream was actually running a halal goat farm. The drought pushed hay prices up, and that's why Samir's on the road. This is Iris and her parrot Casper. Iris works for Amazon's Camper Force program, which is kind of seasonal geriatric migrant labor. Essentially, they hire people, many of them at or nearing traditional retirement age, to do pick and pack in the months leading up to Christmas while staying in their RVs. And this is Linda May, who realized that with $499 a month in Social Security and working as an unpaid caregiver, both for her mom and for as the single mother of two daughters herself, she did not have significant savings. And in this picture, she is campground hosting, helping do maintenance up at Big Bear in California.
Would you say, I'm going to jump to Vivian in just a moment, before we do that, is just to ask you, as a new dimension of retirement, is what you discovered and saw about this mobile migrant elder workforce a sizable part of the retired workforce, or is this sort of a boutique? In terms of, give us some scale, if you will, for what you were observing.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a rapidly growing subculture, particularly in the wake of 2008. But in my mind, it is the tip of the iceberg, and what the iceberg looks like is the nearly 1 in 3 households that have no pension or no retirement savings, headed by people 55 and older.
Wow.
Which is quite a big group. So then you see people coping with that in different ways. So when we're looking at people coping at it in this way, in terms of people living on the road full time, that's in the hundreds of thousands. And in terms of this very specific demographic, elders who are working and on the road full time and have given up traditional housing, that's at least in the tens of thousands, and that's a conservative estimate. So.
Vivian, you deal with lots of groups and retirees. I'd love to get a snapshot from you about the kind of trends you're seeing now. We've seen what was just put on the table with a mobile labor workforce, but in terms of giving us a broader picture of the trends you see about, really Margaret Lowe's question, how do we want to live? There's also an aspirational side of this, of whether those kinds of built-in and embedded visions of what retirement might be for folks, whether that's even attainable for the majority of Americans right now. But give us a snapshot.
Sure. So at the National Council on Aging, we truly acknowledge that vitality, this vision of vitality as you age, is only a part of the story. It's not the entire story. I think a lot of what Jessica presented and what she said in her book and what she's brought today is very true. It is just the tip of the iceberg. What we see through our programs and resources and the advocacy that we engage in, we see that more than half of individuals 65 and older actually have no retirement. More than half are living in poverty, and for them, retirement is not an option. And what do you do then? And I think that's really the question, is that it's not so much that this is a new problem or this is a new phenomenon. I think that now we really are focusing on kind of the other side of aging. Retirement is a great vision of what it could be, but we need to start focusing on what it really is. And so I think conversations like these, I think a book like Jessica's really brings it to light for people, but also I think draws a lens of familiarity, because I know, at least in my family, I know many individuals who will not have retirement, but they're still working. And 2 jobs, low wage workers that have kind of dreams of being able to stop one day, and the only way in which they'll stop is when they can't work anymore.
So we're talking. I mean, I don't mean to put words in your mouth,
Sure.
but there seems to be a bias in our discussion right now. I think that working through those retirement years is a negative, it's a burden, it's a weight. And I have to tell you, I had dinner with last night. I talked to people out in our audience, talked to people around the country, and there are folks where people just they hate the notion of retirement. They want to work. They see it part of their own vitality and who they are. So do we have a problem of bias in there, that somehow you reach an expiration date and that you're not able to kind of be valuable to society anymore, and so we're going to knock you out of your job? So I'm just interested in the other side. Is there an argument to be made that actually changing laws, regulations, giving people greater weight to stay in positions or to continue to work and experience their livelihood that we need that on stage as well?
Absolutely. At the National Council on Aging, we truly believe that aging isn't just a one-size-fits-all thing. People are going to age in a variety of different ways, and that vitality or that need to have something to kind of wake up to in the morning and to feel validated in whatever way that may be is something we have to acknowledge.
So if we don't have a one-size-fits-all, where are the policy deficits in getting things right to create
Sure.
different options?
Sure. So there are some policy issues that we hold near and dear. And what we hold near and dear are Medicare, Medicaid, advocating for those benefits that help older adults as they age. And those are things that we need to start talking about. When we talk about retirement, we have to talk about some of the policy changes that need to be made in order to make sure that everyone ages in their best possible light.
Ida, I don't know how many of you follow Twitter. Twitter is sort of an archaic social platform, but some of us still use it. And Ida's big on Twitter, but I love this, that you're obsessed simultaneously with fountain pens and economic inclusion. So I don't want to really go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I am interested in the kind of broader question we were discussing as we had dinner last evening about how much burden should individuals feel in getting the retirement equation right. We just heard more than half the population, a huge number of Americans, don't have retirement or stuck in various options they might not otherwise have wanted. And we were talking last night, boy, if only 40 years ago they had put aside a few bucks, it would be, they'd all be there. I mean, we were discussing compound interest. It was so exciting last night. But that hasn't happened for a lot of Americans. So how, when you look at this and this question of the macro fish tank and the little fish, who's responsible for where we're at today, and how would you adjust it?
Yeah, and obviously the rhetorical answer is, well, everybody's responsible individually, and then I think collectively as a society, we have choices to make always about how important is it for us to look out in a room and see as many people as possible living dignified lives of choice and meaning, and being able to define some important aspect of that for themselves. And so much of that does kind of go way back into choices that are made or choices that actually just happen for people, early on. When I listen, sorry, there's a little feedback happening for me. When I listen to Jessica, I love the book, Nomadland, and I love the way that you've gotten away in terms of making people coming to life, these individuals coming to life for a much broader sense of people, it's an invisible culture right now, except that I think you're right, that the tip of the iceberg. These are people who are making choices, but they're making the best choices under an extreme constraint in terms of what other options they actually have. And the thing that I look at is the kinds of jobs they did during their working lives are actually the kind of jobs that there's more and more of, where some of the kinds of jobs where you automatically got a pension and a retirement, or you were with the company for 40 years, that has been true for a lot of people, but there's many, many people for whom they did do a lot of bartending and they did a lot of service work. And so what you're seeing now in kind of the transient lives of some of the people you're writing about, that is actually what a growing wave of retirement will look like for people.
So I'm going to be bold here, and I'm sorry, but we have to fix this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can hold it, I can move
we
it.
do everything at the AtlanticLIVE. There we go. I think that might
Fixing
be
it better, is that better for everybody? Oh, thank goodness. I'm so sorry, you all. Anyway, I think the last piece there feels a little bit...
No, leave it where it was.
Leave it where it was.
Yeah.
A little bit like a Harry Potter universe, where we can sit in rooms, I sit in rooms all the time and talk about the retirement system and the way that 401ks work and IRAs work and how does money automatically go into those things, or how do people make choices to put it in. But then you push through that brick wall and there's a whole bunch of people for whom they've never had an employer that actually offered a 401k. And in fact, about 55 million people in America, working Americans, which is almost half the labor force, don't actively at any given time have access to an employer-provided plan. So I think as we look at the changing nature of work,
so just drill down into that one more step, because we have a lot of millennials in the audience, which I'm thrilled with today, and we're talking about gig economy. People are actually saying, hey, I don't want to work a 9-to-5 job all my life and do this and have greater flexibility. Do we actually have the infrastructure for savings and retirement planning for those people who aren't going to work for General Electric for 40 years? I mean, do we have, is there sort of a knowable infrastructure so that people can attach benefits, can have benefits if they're not part of traditional long-term employment, which is disappearing in many ways anyway?
Yeah, I think we have the component parts. It's like a Lego system, right?
But by the way you're answering it, you're saying, no, we don't actually have enough. We don't have it
yet. We have the technology and the ability. And in other countries, they have decided that this is a priority to solve at a societal level. We just haven't quite done that in this country.
Right.
Because we know that a benefit, healthcare benefits, retirement, that they need to be portable. That for the most part now, people's average tenure at a job is 4 years, not 40. So these benefits need to move with people. They can't fall through the cracks as people go from... Whether you're a contract worker or a gig worker or an employee, you should have access to something that automatically helps you have access to savings, to healthcare, to the key benefits that give you security and choice later in life. And I think that is the case right now, where we have even some states now that are saying, right, we're going to have an automatic enrollment. Every employer in the state has to, in places like Oregon now, has to decide to either put direct deposit in place to split a worker's paycheck into its regular pay and a retirement account. That worker can opt out, but that's happening in the UK. And over the last couple of years, there's now, 8 or 9 million more people with savings that never had it before. The state of California is just starting to do this as well. So that's one piece. If there's an automatic enrollment part of this, the portability part, the fees, all of that has to go, has to be worked on together. And there are people in private industry that are being super innovative in this space. There's even opportunity now for association plans. So I think it's really rethinking the role of the employer, and if they're central to the actual responsibility for taking care of their worker, or if their agency in that process is really more about facilitating access to where people's payroll goes so that there's money in an account. And I think the other piece that maybe is a key to this is realizing that retirement, just like your working life, it's not just retirement over here. There's financial shocks from healthcare. There's financial shocks from your car breaking down. People's whole financial life is what we have to think about, both working and in retirement. And right now, we're still kind of fissured in ways that's not particularly helpful for the worker.
Jessica, I'm interested, as you delved into human stories, real lives, people that were experiencing that, are they angry that they're in their situation now, or do they have time for anger? When they hear about all of this contraption, 401ks, employers, but they were hit by a tsunami, many of them in the 08-09 financial crisis. I'm just interested in how, if they were here listening to this, would they say, God, we're really disconnected from their reality?
This venue would be very disconnected from their reality.
It's disconnected from many realities.
Yeah, we are
but,
Hogwarts.
Yeah.
But so many of the people I've met, it's funny, I've been asked before, where are the torches and pitchforks?
Yeah.
And there are no torches and pitchforks. People are thinking about where's my next campsite, where's my next gig. I feel like there is such a strange dialogue in our country right now around poverty. Basically, the message from our leader and others, that is if somehow you didn't win in a great casino that is our national economy, that you are a capital L loser and you're a bad person and you're probably lazy, which is a horrible thing to tell people. Shame is also a great way to keep people down. So I don't see people who are angry. I also don't see people who are expecting any sort of cavalry to come and help anytime soon, and are really taking what's available to them and saying, look, this may look like hardship and grapes of wrath to some people, but for me, this is what's going to look like freedom, because otherwise I'd be on that treadmill until I die, and I'm getting out and finding a community. So for a lot of people, this is about taking the agency that is left to them, which to us does not look like quite the palette of choices that I would like to see. And just to add, when we talk about retirement and what it means to work, just retirement has almost become a dirty word. This has come up when I've spoken with some other economists, just in terms of people think, oh, retirement, the golf course. I don't think retirement has to mean you're disengaged with life and work and the world. For me, when I look at these people, retirement would mean more of a choice, that even if you're working at a job that's meaningful to you. You know, I know two people who broke their ribs doing some of these jobs because they're jobs that probably are not great for where their bodies are chronologically. Yeah. So I think just giving people some more options is really what we're talking about too, not just the ability to sit down and eat potato chips and play golf, which is good for some people but doesn't fit all.
Well, I think, one of the questions I need to ask both you and Vivian, Ida, again, thinking about the way we frame this, the way we talk about it, one of the things that's come up to me, and some have talked about, is the lexicon. It is the language. There is this question of whether or not we've built in a kind of discrimination, if you will, ageism, even in the way we discuss things. And I'm just interested in your insights on how we can improve. What would be a better discourse that would be healthier in talking about this than we may systematically do? Vivian?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on some of the millennials in the room, and I'd like to ask them a question, or at least raise your hand. How many of you in formal education, high school education, learned what a 401k was, what retirement actually meant, those papers they make you sign at your first job, what do they mean? How many of you
No one's going to put up their hand if you give them all that, yeah? So, any hands go up yet? Yeah?
And I think the step before really thinking about the opportunities out there for people to actually have a retirement or to be close to retirement is that formal education, whether it's changing the lexicon or whether it's defining it in its simplest terms that we possibly can, to make sure that everybody has the accessibility to understanding what they're getting into or understanding what they're opting out of.
Right.
So I do agree. I think it's taking a step back and saying, how can we really make this path to retirement equitable? Not necessarily equal, but equitable.
Jessica, do you have thoughts on whether we have a biased language, a discrimination? You were mentioning stigma a minute ago.
It's funny, I teach grad students, and I work with a lot of millennials, and I think when younger people hear the word retirement, they tend to yawn, they think of this dusty thing where it's, well, I don't want to not do anything. So that's kind of where I'm coming from looking at it, and that the idea of not why should I be interested in that, but the idea that somehow it's going to connote some sort of soul death or some lack of engagement with the wider world when I want to stay active, and that's not what it means. So in a weird way, I do think retirement could use a little bit of a rebranding as more of a period of choice rather than a period where you're just done.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to be done.
Well, and it's not. There is no way that any of us could look at our working lives and say that's just one big bucket. It's the exact same thing for the whole time, right? And then this next bucket of retirement. I think these things, to your point, are going to get more and more blended. People work for amounts of time, they take time off, they redefine, they retool, they reskill, they work again. All of the ability, each time you have an inflection point in life, to have a choice about what's next, comes from financial security. I've heard this said, and I say it more now than this person probably doesn't even remember they ever said this, but they looked at me one time on a panel like this and they said, Ida, it's one thing to swing for it, but you're standing on solid ground. If you're standing in a canoe and you swing for it, it's going to be a lot harder. So I think what we're talking about are how do you create the maximum amount of choice and stability at any point in a person's life for them to give back to the community, create, produce, be productive in society, and that's a mind shift, but it's also a set of infrastructure institutions that have to shift in service of longevity, which we're still wrapping our heads around completely, let alone what is the financial component of that, let alone what is the healthcare component of that. So I think that is going to be one of the pieces that has to change.
So I'm going to go to the audience in just a minute, but I want to ask you, just brass tacks, blunt, if you were to think of strategies that would change the game, because I'm really interested, what moves the needle in getting more resources and whether it's private, public, what little twists out there might we think of? They may not solve it all, but would actually move us forward a bit that we haven't thought about as much as we should. Just real quick, two things.
A couple of things. I do think that expanding the number of people able to save, automatically being able to save earlier in their career, so you let the financial system grow that pot for them, is going to be important. So I think that some of the nudges like automatic enrollment will matter there. I also think that letting the portability issue with gig workers and contingent workers, having a way for them to save in the system is important. So just thinking about just net new savings, that excites the financial services industry. That's more assets under management. That is, and then that coupled with the oncoming financial technology that can drive down costs and make transfers easy and make portability easy, I think that can go a long way. What we do need for that is political will. And that's going to be the thing. We have to make retirement issues and financial security issues a top national priority. And right now, they are really about individual choice. We have to make this a collective thing of importance for all of us.
Thank you. Let's go to the audience. I want to get right down here to the front because I've rigged one. We'll come to you in just a second. Hi. My friend Byron Carlock here is the head of the U.S. real estate leader for Price Waterhouse. I'm not giving an advertisement to Price Waterhouse. But we were talking about retirement security last night, and you said something that I thought was very innovative, kind of weird. So I just want you to just share with the audience, because as far as a brainstorming of things that we're not doing today to help look at how mortgages and whatnot hold so much of people's financial wealth and got whacked during the financial crisis. But recount just in 2 minutes, Byron, what you shared with me last night.
Sure. I think that we're going to see a recalibration of the way people choose to live, and our capital markets are going to have to catch up with that. And one idea is intergenerational housing, where mom or grandmom's Social Security check can be part of the financial calculation for qualifying for a multi-generational or multi-friend mortgage. We already see the auto finance industry responding with multi-borrower autos that are used for sharing. And I think that the capital markets is going to have to catch up to this idea. And there are many underused homes that can be converted. I was just visiting about converting in New York City and in the suburbs, how expensive it is to do that. But if you go out to a small town and you look at what's happening in New Hope, Pennsylvania, or Oxford, Mississippi, or any Ole Miss grads in here, or Charlottesville, Virginia, you see that the affinity of being attached to a community or a college is drawing people back together. Even my little town of Blytheville, Arkansas, where I grew up, has 19 of my high school classmates looking at buying old historic homes in that town and moving back because they are so cheap. And it may mean sharing the house or sharing the mortgage, but the capital markets have not caught up to that yet.
Thank you. I found this idea of shared thinking and shared community building, and also this intergenerational dimension of it, a new idea. It's sort of I don't know how big an idea is, but it was very interesting. But let me go, right to you. Thank you, Byron, right here.
Hi, I'm Beth Finkel. I work for AARP.
Hi.
And I really appreciate this conversation, and thank you, Ida, talking about the secure choice savings programs. But the other side of this, and you kind of touched on this, is the medical costs. Out-of-pocket medical costs after you retire is approaching $300,000 for a couple. So who budgets for $300,000 out of pocket once you hit retirement? I think this goes back to what you were saying before about rethinking policy, how the government looks at aging, because nobody has an idea. Whenever we survey our members and we ask, are you aware that it's going to be close to $300,000 out of pocket for your medical costs? Nobody knows it. It's staggering. Nobody's ever budgeted for that.
Thank you for raising that. I'd love to get any responses, and also tell you the Atlantic 2 years ago had a cover story on an upper middle class income, and how $400 or $500 even at that level could really disable them. I mean, we were talking about the spectrum, and most of it is healthcare, unexpected healthcare expenses. But what is the National Council doing on that front?
Sure,
Why don't you get it fixed?
working on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. We agree with you. I agree with you. And what we need to start looking at in this country is that health is an economic security issue. And economic security is a health issue. They don't live in silos, and we don't handle them in silos. We live them at the same time. And so I think our policies need to reflect that.
Great, thank you. And I think we have a question. Yes, in the very back.
Okay. Yes, hi, my name is Steve Brandt. I'm a social systems scientist. I studied with Dr. Russell Akoff at the Wharton School, and it's sometimes called design thinking. I mention that because if we want to change the game, we have to look at the fundamental beliefs that underlie the design of our society. Can we have a society where everyone wins, or is it always going to be winners and losers? Is it always going to be competition, or can it be cooperation? Some of the other people who worked on this, W. Edwards Deming many years ago. And so I'd like to ask you to consider this notion of just how are we organized? Are we...
Thank you. So I think it's a great question, and I really think it gets into this question of does our social contract really, as you think about inclusion, Ida, or you've been out on the road and living in campers for 3 years, I think part of this question is of winners and losers is almost built in to the U.S. system, almost built on there always being losers. Are there different ways to frame this that we should be getting at? Jessica?
One quick number I always point to is that we can say there's always been winners and losers, but that's actually, it's incredibly polarized right now. If you go back to the 60s, when CEO to worker pay was 20-something to 1, and now it's 271 to 1, I mean, that's where all the money went, to shareholders. So I think it's tempting to say it's always been this way, but it's actually quite extreme right now. There's an international measure of income inequality that is used called the Gini coefficient, which is politically neutral and measures income inequality as a factor in national stability. The U.S. has the greatest among all so-called developed nations inequality in the world. We're around Russia, Argentina, China, the war-torn Democratic of the Congo. So I like the idea of sharing. We need to share more, but now is not the same as it's always been. It's a lot worse.
Right, Ida?
And I'll just say, and this will go back to the first question, I think to that end, there is a way to re-envision, in a uniquely American way, shared risk and shared reward, where right now it is hard for individuals to take risks that lead to better lives and easier choices, because to take that risk you have to have, there's a lot at stake. But if there was a way to de-risk ownership of wealth, or to create a little bit more stability to give people the ease of mind, I think that's a possibility. So we're seeing a resurgence in cooperative ownerships, this idea of multi-generational. I think there's a lot of innovation that we can tap into right now, and I think there's a lot of appeal, especially with millennials. And when we're building the next retirement system, we have to build it for that generation. We have to be thinking 20 years out. It's going to take that long to get there. So I think that it's, put all the ideas on the table right now. There are people ready to get together and really start to put it together.
Terrific. Right here. Last question of the session, then we'll come back. I see my other friends out there with hands. We'll get to you. Go ahead.
My name is Elizabeth White, and I'm the author of 55 Underemployed and Faking Normal. And I loved your book.
I want to thank Elizabeth, who spoke last year here,
I did.
so thank you so much.
And one of the things I wanted to say is that there are people who've had a lifelong experience of poverty and are having a tough old age.
Right.
But this has now hit the middle class. There are many people who've had career choice, significant incomes, and are looking at downward mobility for the first time.
Right.
And so I think about what happens in the meantime. Teresa Ghilarducci has a stat that I think is so important. When you look at median savings, the top 10% have saved $200,000, 55 to 64. The next 40%, it's 60,000. And the bottom 50%, the median savings is 0. So what Jessica is talking about is going to affect many, many more people. And some of the solutions that have a 20-year horizon don't impact
like
those
lost
of us
generation.
living us now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thoughts on it from the National Council perspective? Because I completely agree. I've read Teresa Ghilarducci's tough last name, but great work if you ever want to kind of dive into this. But on those trends and seeing growing and basically downward mobility that happens at these retired years or this phase of life, do you have any rabbits up your sleeve that you can share with us?
Well, through our programs, resources, and advocacy, we continuously try to think, again, aging doesn't happen in one way, and we continuously try to have that image of that individual who, for them, maybe $6, saving $6 a month maybe is not an option. But we also think of the middle-class individual that now is facing this downward spiral, and introducing them, changing the lexicon, talking more to communities, being in communities, and introducing them to the notion that there are benefits out there that are accessible to them, and reducing the stigma and what that may mean to actually going and looking for those benefits and helping them get more money into their pocket, at the end of the month. And so I think it's a mix of everything that we've talked about here.
Well, I want to thank you. Great conversation. Jessica Bruder, Vivian Nava-Schellinger, and Ida Rademacher, thank you all very much for taking us down this road. Thank you.